Before we get started in this one, we should point out most of the information we're about to cover is from the Star Wars Expanded Universe, also known as Legends these days, a vast wilderness of occasionally conflicting information that Disney expunged from official canon, supposedly to allow them to create something more cohesive. But as they promptly threw that out the window, it would seem really just to give themselves more creative freedom with the franchise, which I think, with a few exceptions, we can all agree was a huge mistake. As a result, most of what we're about to say isn't technically canon anymore. However, it is interesting if you like Star Wars, and I'll be cold in my grave before I cease to acknowledge certain elements of the classic expanded universe as anything but canon. In any event, after the injury sustained on Mustafar in the duel with Obi-Wan Kenobi, for all intents and purposes, Vader became wholly dependent on the self-contained life support system that is his suit. This suit takes care of all of his bodily needs, essentially replacing or subsidizing most of his internal organs, and taking care of Vader's breathing, heart rate, eating, and yes, even pooping. In regards to the latter, because how could we not talk about how Darth Vader defecates, the novel notes that the Sith Lord relies on a complex series of catheters, collection pouches, and recyclers so that he can pass waste. All of these systems work, for the most part, autonomously without any direct input from Vader himself. However, they can be interacted with via the buttons on his chest plate. According to such sources as the reference book, Darth Vader, a 3D reconstruction log, which goes into detail about the specifics of Vader's armor, the big red button on Vader's chest was a manual override switch which allowed Vader to exert himself more than his suit would normally allow with the proper tweaking of some other controls on his chest plate and belt. The blue button located above this red one, on the other hand, returns control to the suit's automatic systems. The other buttons on his chest are noted by the book to be programmed touch plates, save for the rightmost red button, which when pressed would reset all Vader's life support systems, including heart rate regulation. During the reset process, Vader would be more or less disabled for a time and near death while things came back online. So yes, Vader would be easily defeatable by any Jedi via said Jedi simply using the Force to press the reset button on his suit, then sweeping in quickly while he's partially disabled and lopping his head off. As such, in any duel, Vader always has to be careful to guard his chest piece above anything else, both with his lightsaber and the Force. Nevertheless, something like this happened in the expanded universe when Antonis Tremaine almost defeated Vader by pressing a button on his chest panel, causing Vader to collapse while gasping for air. Vader also has a belt that has 3 small control boxes on it, with the left one including controls for regulating his breathing manually, particularly handy when trying to sneak up on your son in a dark corridor in Cloud City. As for the other boxes, the middle one is said to contain spare energy cells and some basic communications equipment for emergencies, as well as audio sensors. The buttons on the rightmost box are temperature controls, allowing Vader to adjust his suit's internal temperature to suit his needs. This same type of environmental control is also found in Stormtrooper suits. If you're now wondering why Vader's suit has external, very vulnerable controls that could kill or incapacitate him if someone fiddled with them, Vader was curious about that too, and though it's never explicitly confirmed by the Emperor, a popular theory that is echoed by Darth Vader himself in some novels is that the suit was specifically designed that way to make sure he was always vulnerable. For instance, in one book, Vader expressed both confusion and annoyance at the poor quality of the cybernetic implants he'd been given, especially in comparison to the much more modern cybernetic limb he had previously had installed after Count Dooku lopped off one of his limbs. In novels and comics where you're granted a brief glimpse into Vader's mind, the Sith Lord makes it clear that his armor is both uncomfortable and ill-fitting, painfully snagging on his ruined flesh as he moves. Beyond this, the synthetic flesh they chose to use to replace his old skin is noted to itch constantly. The suit also included needles that were uncomfortably jammed into his head to interface with his mind, and the monitoring panel on his chest beeped frequently and for no reason. Beyond being outdated, the equipment was also conspicuously spotty in its reliability, with parts regularly breaking down and various bits of his life support system regularly on the fritz, constantly reminding Vader of how tenuously he was clinging to life. All this hindered his ability to ever relax or even get anything better than short stints of sleep here and there. No wonder he was so grumpy all the time. This ensured Vader was always suffering from some level of exhaustion to go along with being uncomfortable and having limited mobility, including it being extremely difficult for him to even raise his arms above his shoulder level. Then there was the weight of the suit. This was such that one of the few areas of his body that wasn't damaged after his battle with Obi-Wan, his spine, actually largely had to be replaced over time as it could not support the bulky suit. You might be wondering at this point why Vader didn't simply get a more modern suit made for himself that would be more comfortable, drastically less vulnerable to damage, not make him feel claustrophobic all the time, and give him back his old mobility. Such a suit was designed, but unfortunately, without the Emperor's help to sustain his life during the transplant of his body from one suit to the other, such an operation would likely have resulted in his death. And even with said help, which would require a great deal of trust in the Emperor on Vader's part, it would have been a risky procedure. So while the suit was designed, it was never built. Because of the limitation and the effects of the outdated suit, Vader was unable to ever truly tap the full extent of his connection to the Force. This was of vital importance to the Emperor, as various sources like the novel, The Last Jedi, the 2013 book, Not the Other, which we here at Fact Quickie refuse to acknowledge exists, states even in this weakened, distracted, and permanently exhausted state, Vader was still almost as powerful as the Emperor and could theoretically best him. A final piece of evidence that corroborates this is that Darth Vader's suit was designed in such a way that many of his vital systems were extremely vulnerable to simple electrical shocks. This was revealed to Vader by the Emperor himself after Vader began to chafe under the Emperor's rule. The Emperor made sure Vader knew that anytime he wished, he could use Force lightning to irreversibly damage Vader's life support systems. After learning of this, Vader resubmitted himself to the Emperor and, on the side, added some electrical insulators to the vulnerable parts of his suit to help mitigate the problem. But it wasn't enough. In the end, it was this vulnerability that ended Vader's life. When he picked up the Emperor to save Luke, even the non-directed Force lightning was sufficient to severely damage Vader's respiratory control system, leading to his death aboard the second Death Star in Return of the Jedi. Speaking of severing limbs, ever wonder if you have the right to ask for amputated limbs and the body parts back from the hospital? Well, check out our video here and find out.